This then is the first lesson of Booklet 4, looking at the establishment of the Nazi totalitarian dictatorship. So around the diagram in your book, give at least 5 things that you would think needed to be done if you wish to create a total dictatorship where you had total totalitarian control over everybody. What would you need to do? Hitler had complete control of Germany after Hindenburg's death in 1934. Internal threats had been removed with the elimination of the SA, and external threats had been dealt with earlier in 1933 with the Reichstag fire, the Emergency Decree and the Enabling Act. Hitler now set about establishing a totalitarian dictatorship where he had control over everything and everyone. To quote Hugh Trevor Roper, his intention was to create a society from which even the imagination had no means of escape. So then, the aims for the lesson, the objectives are to start having an idea how the Nazi dictatorship was run, and possibly how that style of government compares and contrasts with 21st century Britain. We'll also start to speculate as to how far Hitler was in control of Germany, and start looking at how he dealt with the enemies of the state, or as he thought they were. Your first task will be to read the statements and place them into the correct box, be it a description of the role of the leader, the role of the police, and the role of communication in either Nazi Germany or modern Britain. Please place those statements, having read them, into what you think is the appropriate box. Now, in order to be an effective totalitarian dictator, 3 features have to be established. Firstly, you need a dictator who is prepared to dictate. Secondly, you need a police force in order to implement the will of the dictator, a police force that rule through fear. We often refer to this as a police state. Thirdly, you need to control what people see and what people hear. You therefore need to control the media. In this first task that you have in front of you now, you're going to look at the type of person who would be a dictator, so the nature of dictatorship itself. Look at the picture of Hitler, and I'd like you to be able to identify the differences between the facts and the inferences that you can draw from this particular picture. Next, we need to consider the reality. Is it what we saw in the picture previously of Hitler leading Germany? Or is this description by Fritz Weidemann, one of Hitler's personal assistants, contradictory? I sometimes secure decisions from him, even ones about important matters, without his ever asking to see the relevant files. He took the view that many things sorted themselves out on their own if one did not interfere. But the question was, how did they sort themselves out? The party leaders found it easier to get something out of him. If they belonged to the top ranks, they could always come to lunch. During coffee, they quickly explained their problem to him, and normally they got the decision they wanted. He let people tell him things he wanted to hear, everything else he rejected. Hitler refused to let himself be informed. How can one tell someone the truth who immediately gets angry when the facts do not suit? Perhaps that may be part of his strength. Now, using that information, what does it tell us about how Germany was run by Hitler? And follow that up with the idea then, do you believe, as the propaganda would suggest, as the previous picture of Hitler would suggest, that he was a strong leader? Or was he a weak leader? Or possibly was he both? Your next task will be to identify the people who didn't fit into Hitler's dictatorship. Using the reading materials that you have been provided with, your task then is to look at the various different groups in Germany that found themselves in concentration camps. The Jews, politicals, the work-shy, the religious conscientious objectors, homosexuals, and professional criminals. What I want you to do from the descriptions that you have been given is to consider why Hitler regarded them as a threat and why they needed to be jailed. In order to complete your table on who didn't fit into the Nazi state under the Nazis and who found themselves incarcerated, imprisoned in the earliest concentration camps. You will be given the descriptions of each of the groups. Following the description, you are to use a comprehension activity and inference to determine why they were a threat to the Nazis. So the first group were the Jews, and Hitler believed that the Jews were to blame for Germany's problems, especially the defeat of Germany during the First World War, and also he linked Jewish financiers and economists to the Wall Street crash of 1929. Hitler believed in an international Jewish conspiracy, planning to overthrow the world. He referred to the Jewish race as a subhuman race, and that they were the eternal enemy of the pure German people. By 1933, the Jews had been excluded from the civil service, and the 1935 Nuremberg laws denied Jews of their German citizenship. The photograph shows an early 1934 boycott of Jewish shops. The next group are people who belonged to other political parties in Germany, often referred to as political criminals or simply politicals. Hitler wanted total power, and other parties were obviously an obstacle to that. They had votes, but they also showed that people shared their views. They had opposing views to National Socialism, so they were forced out of society. They were imprisoned, and life was made very difficult for them. Outspoken opponents were imprisoned in concentration camps, some of them even executed. The work shy. Hitler believed in a living German nation, the Volk, where everyone contributed like individual cells contribute to a living organism. The work shy were considered to be parts of a body that didn't actually contribute. They were a drain on society, and they undermined the morale of the other Germans who were working hard. In June 1933, the Nazis passed a law to reduce unemployment. The unemployed were made to work on public work schemes, such as the Autobahn shown in the picture, the world's first motorways. Schools, hospitals were also built. Workers were controlled by the German Labour Front, the DAF, and the whole purpose of this was to build a modern Germany that Germans could be proud in, and in the long term would be preparing Germany for war. Religious objectors, Bibelforscher. The Nazis believed that Germans could not have two gods. No man can have two masters. It would cause a problem for the Nazis if, down the line, Hitler's ambitions contradicted deeply held religious beliefs. The Nazis wanted total control over German life, but obviously would struggle to ban God. 1/3 of Germans were Catholics and 2/3 were Protestant. So Hitler united all Protestant churches under the Reich Church, making one church. However, not everyone went along with this, and although they were punished, the faith movement was set up as an alternative to Christianity. Homosexuals. They didn't fit in with Hitler's plans for a perfect Germany. They couldn't have children, chose not to have children, so they weren't providing for Germany the future manpower it would need. The Nazis, back in the 1930s, believed that homosexuality was unnatural. People who didn't contribute needed to be punished. Professional criminals. The law was what Hitler used to control people. Professional people routinely, habitually broke the law. Each time you broke one of the Nazi laws, you were breaking Hitler's laws. The Nazis imprisoned or executed persistent criminals.